Welcome wherever you are around the world. You are in the virtual living room of Globus Books, a literary salon. Globus Books is a small, powerful, independent bookstore that has been around for 50 years in the historical setting in San Francisco. This year in the fall, we will be celebrating 50th anniversary. So check us out, subscribe to our channel. We do a number of all kinds of shows covering new and exciting books. We have an anthropology and history section where we did a number of fascinating shows. Check it out on the playlist on YouTube. We mainly do literary translation, literary readings, poetry readings, bilingual. Most of our shows are in English with some focus on the former Soviet Union and former Russian Empire area, which is quite large part of the world, as you know. So it's not only Russian, we have Ukrainian, Belarusian, Kazakh, you name it. So today we are really excited to welcome a new book. It is called A Story of Us, and it will cover a new look at human evolution, something entirely new to all of us. And it is my pleasure to pass the mic to Luba Astashevsky, who is the agent of this book. My name is Irina Zabriskie. I'm a writer from San Francisco, and I'm a host and producer of these shows. And for now, Luba Astashevsky, who is the literary agent from New York. She's also an educator and a journalist and a writer herself with a number of publications in prominent scientific magazines and just journalistic publications such as Al Jazeera and so forth.
All right there. Thank you for that, Zarina. Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your afternoon to join us. As Zarina was saying, we're very excited to welcome this new book into the world, A Story of Us. And it gives us the opportunity to talk about something that we humans are just inevitably interested in, the story of who we are and where we came from. So I first wanted to take a few moments and introduce our panel. So first, we're very happy to have the authors of the book here with us. Lesley Newson, a researcher at University of UC Davis. Her husband, Pete Richerson, professor emeritus at UC Davis. And we also have with us participating in the panel, Dr. Peter Turchin, professor at University of Connecticut and also the director of Evolution Institute, as well as Dr. Sergei Gavrilets, professor at University of Tennessee. Gabriella Campbell, an anthropology student at, I believe, also at University of Davis?
University of Santa Barbara, California, Santa Barbara.
Thank you, Gabby. And Gabby and I will be tag teaming, asking questions of Doctors Newson, Richerson, Turchin, and Gavrilets. And our goal is to really make this a conversation that's accessible to the everyday, educated, curious person without any particular grounding in anthropology, in genetics, in biology. You know, who we are and where we come from is a question that, you know, a lot of people are interested in. And that's what we're hoping to make of this discussion. And I also want to take a moment to thank my cousin, Zarina, for organizing this, Globus Books. And in a sense, you know, she said to me, exploit your family. So I'm exploiting my family. And I feel like that's a really nice way to dovetail into a conversation about the story of us. Because in a sense, family, exploitation are all motifs and themes that run through the book.
And here comes the first disclosure of the show, because I'm the most secretive part of the family, was going to keep it all, spy-like. But here we go.
I had to blow it.
All in the family. Back to Luba.
Typical. So I thought I would start by, going back on a mini journey. I feel 4 or 5 years ago when I first connected with Lesley, and we hatched the plan of working on this book together, and just share with you really what drew me to the book. So I met Lesley when I was a managing editor for This View of Life, part of the Evolution Institute, as Dr. Richerson will affirm. And I read Lesley's essay about kind of exploring, asking this question of why it is that humans have so few children. And I thought, of course, this is ridiculous. Humans have so many children, 2 children, maybe 3 children. We have so many children. I myself have 1, so even less than that. But as I read Lesley's intriguing argument that, as the goal of the individual is really to leave as, I guess, large of a genetic trail as possible, to leave as many descendants as possible, it does seem that there is something different about humans that made them make the decision, or, that events unfurled, that our families are really smaller than most other animals. And so specifically what really drew me to that is this focus on families. Is in most evolution books that I read, having been a book editor specializing in popular science, was really about, what is it about humans that makes us different? Symbolic thinking, or cooking meat, or cooperation. And I felt that these ideas promoted by Lesley and Pete took all of those disparate pieces together, and out of that drew a much bigger idea. But specifically, what really drew me in was this focus on families, and this focus specifically on child rearing and on mother, and on the relationship between mother and child. I believe we're probably all here who at least read a little bit of the book. So specifically, I'm thinking of the section where Lesley and Pete describe in the second person what it must have been like if we were primate mothers trying to raise a child in the wilderness, and comparing that to how one would go about getting food in a cafeteria where there's actually no food, but there are just small packets of ketchup or mayonnaise around. And that comparison just really made me feel what it might be like to be a primate mother trying to nurture her child. So for me, it was that emphasis on motherhood, on child rearing, that really changed the tenor of the conversation that we have about evolution. And so I guess my first question, or kind of like an opening gambit to start the conversation, is can you tell us more about that? Can you tell us about that particular relationship between parent and child, mother and child, and the creation of a family, and how it guides your view of what it is that makes humans different?
Well, I'll jump in, Luba, because it was my thing, and I feel that I maybe by marrying Pete, I dragged him into this idea that, darling, you need to think about families more, because a colleague of ours called Sarah Hurdy has fought for years to try to make evolution realize that if the important thing about the way you pass on genes in any organism is that you have children that survive. And yet all the stories about evolution that were being told were all about guys going out and getting women, or guys going out and hunting, or guys going out and fighting wars. And so I having, when I started my PhD, I had a 10-year-old daughter, and I knew that being a mother was really hard. And I like Luba, like you, Luba, I only had one child, and it was really hard. And that's made me decide at the age of 45 to start working on a PhD, because I wanted to understand. To contribute to the understanding of human evolution, which took into account the fact that there's this child rearing thing going on that people aren't talking about much. And then, of course, as soon as I got into university, I realized there were people talking about it. It just wasn't really being talked about much in public. So anyway, and that was that PhD led to me meeting Pete, and then ultimately us writing this book together. But so, as you say, Luba, other apes, it's the mother and the baby. The main link in the social group of an ape is between the mother and the baby. And at some point that changed with humans, so that we were no longer just this little link which was going to keep the baby alive. Larger links formed. We became a family, and so we've been arguing with our book that that's a really, really, really important thing. And we've invited Sergey and Peter Turchin to come along, because they've also been very interested in the idea of how humans link up. And they've done far more work on it, especially looking at men as well. And of course, Pete's been working on it in every way for years. So what I really wanted to do was to bring it to the public attention by trying to find a way of bringing it all together and explaining how humans could have gone from this ape with a single bond between mother and baby to becoming this incredible ape that has many, many bonds, huge society, shares information all over the world. So here's the cover of the book, and here's this kind of chapter list which shows the different chapters of the book. It starts with the ape 7 million years ago, and then we argue that around 3 million years ago, our ape ancestor female that was living 3 million years ago joined up to form families where they basically were cooperative breeders. They shared the care of their offspring. And there weren't necessarily males involved, apart from male offspring who were still young, but then the males left.
I wonder if, I think people might be interested to know if there is any point or any reason that scientists think, what led to that change? Like, what led to one set of primates, the mother being on her own, and then, I don't know, maybe 100,000 years later, the father is being involved and also taking responsibility for the nurturing and the raising of the offspring. I feel like that moment is, to me at least, is very interesting. And if, according to science, there's any understanding of what led to it.
But Luba, there are no such things as moments in evolution. Evolution is really, really slow. And also, it's impossible to know about the past. But the one thing we do know about our ape ancestors was that they left the forest. And that's really, really important, because all other apes and that live today live in forests. And it's a completely different life living in the forest compared to living where we know our ancestors were living between, well, after about 3 million years ago. They were living in dry, much drier countryside where the foods weren't in these little packages of, of ketchup and mayonnaise. They were spread out, larger packages spread out. And for a clever animal, lots and lots of opportunities of learning how to make a living. The problem was so hard for mothers and babies, because imagine holding a baby when you have to travel a half a mile to find one piece of food, and then another half a mile to find another piece of food, a huge piece of food. And then the water is a half a mile in another direction. I mean, I don't see how it could be done unless there was some way of keeping your children safe, so that you didn't have to drag them around with you everywhere you went. It was, I think that the habitat change was the moment, if you like, that demanded that females cooperate.
The habitat was packed with very dangerous predators and other animals.
Right.
Absolutely, yeah, of course, yeah, and that made it even harder for apes who were dragging around their babies. Yeah, of course. So I just wondered, does that argument, does that argument make sense to you, that it was the move out of the forest that drove females to work together? And do you think that males had a role or not, Peter?
Well, let me just jump for a second.
Okay.
Of course, the question of the origin of human family, this is a huge question in evolutionary biology and anthropology, and it's been discussed for decades. And let me first mention that there are some data that suggest that transition from promiscuity to pair bonding happened really a very long time ago. And evolutionary biologists make that conclusions on a couple of traits that are very morphological traits that are rather different in humans than in chimpanzees. One such trait is sexual size dimorphism, the difference between males and females. So usually when there is very strong competition for females, when there is promiscuity in a species, males are significantly bigger than females. And that's what happens in chimpanzees. And there is dimorphism in humans, but it's dramatically less in magnitude than in chimps. Another trait that is also usually indicative of promiscuity is the size of testes. And there are some differences in morphology. So, and then there are some teeth that males use in fights, canine teeth. And again, some data suggest that Ardipithecus, and it's kind of a related species to us that was in existence about 3 or 4 million years ago, already has significantly reduced canine teeth. So that kind of suggests that probably transition to pair bonding in our species happened a very, very long time ago. And as far as reasons for it, well, several have been discussed, and some of these Lesley will not like because males will play an important role in this. For example, one hypothesis was that pair bonding, and pair bonding is crucial because it's males also who start contributing to offspring success and not just females. One hypothesis is that it's basically evolved from male guarding. Males wanted to hang around females to prevent other males to mate with them. And then kind of the story goes. And now a hypothesis is that while some food was provided to females to simplify access and mating opportunities. And then there are also ideas about just providing food to offspring to increase of offspring survival. So there is kind of the whole set of different ideas that attempt kind of to tie things together, but there is no definite answer yet.
Yeah, but my problem with the parabonding argument, Sergey, is that if the males are, if there's parabonding and the males are mate guarding, how can they actually be helpful in that environment? I mean, the males maybe could have carried around the offspring, but how is that as helpful? I mean, if you have females being cooperating, then they can take turns looking after each other's offspring, whereas the males would never go out and do anything. They would just be hanging around the females.
Well, the idea is what males protect the offspring, and that helps. Yeah, there is an alternative hypothesis, and I think it was Richard Wrangham, famous primatologist, who put it forward, and it's related to the origin of fire. So basically, our ancestors invented and started using fire at least 1 million years ago, and when we basically started, and females were, again, this is a politically incorrect idea, sorry, like males were hunting and females were making, cooking food. So basically, but males can always take food from females by force. So in this Richard Wrangham's idea, females pretty much were buying protection with food from other males. So it's like paying protection money to mafia, to one mafia group to prevent other mafia groups to interfering and taking things from you. So there are always different stories around.
Right, and the big problem is that social organization doesn't fossilize very well. So we only have, as Sergey says, these indirect anatomical indications. So but the reduced canines, an alternate story for reduced canines would be, once we were Australopithecines, we were upright, we started fighting with our hands instead of with our teeth. And so grabbing a stick and beating the other guy with it was, if you had hands to do that with, was a substitute for those big canines. So and the sex dimorphism is a debated topic. So it's a mess. And that's one of the reasons we called our book A Story of Us rather than The Story of Us, because there are lots of stories one can tell that are consistent with the skimpy evidence that we have. And so it's really difficult to tell a definitive story that everyone will agree to. So paleoanthropologists have their varying opinions, and they fight like cats over these things. And so it seems to us that a little bit of humility with regard to the quality of the evidence is warranted. So that's
let me add a bit to this story, yet another angle. You know, chimps cannot do this.
Yeah,
chimps cannot throw anything. I mean, they're really lousy at throwing, and so this is a very interesting. The anatomy of the shoulder is a very good indicator of when humans started using projectiles, thrown sticks and stones. And of course, once you start using stones as a way to fight, then you can gang up. Several people can several weak people can gang up on one powerful individual and basically pellet him, usually that would be a him, with stones to drive him away or even kill him. So that's another part of the story which led to foraging societies being very egalitarian. It is because weaker members of the troop can gang up on bullies and basically control them by using thrown projectiles.
Yeah, that's certainly becomes important in ethnographically known hunters and gatherers. The question is, when did that sort of thing get established? So my longtime colleague Rob Boyd has this hypothesis. I don't think we've ever published it, but he thinks that way back in the time of Australopithecines, that stick and stone throwing was really important, mainly to protect against predators. So you can imagine that a mob of Australopithecines carrying sticks and stones that they could hit with and throw fairly effectively. If they came upon a carcass, say being eaten by lions, that lions had killed, they might be able to drive the lions off just by threatening or actually throwing stones, and they could be pretty rough to deal with. And so that's another story that we don't tell, but it's one you could tell.
Can I just say, guys, that it's really interesting that us girls started talking about nurturing and parenting and feeding our offspring, and you guys have started talking about beating each other up. I really do hope that we can find some way of getting together, and because I'm sure that both was important.
I do have a question that was, brought up, in that, Peter was saying it's a story of us, not the story of us. And how did you and Peter, Lesley, end up? I'll let you answer it first, then we can, see what Peter has to say. How did you end up choosing to tell your story in this way, through the second person, telling of the birth story, but also how you break down further, what evidence actually in the fossil record supports these stories? How did you choose, that type of format for this representation of your story of human evolution that you wanted to share with the world?
The stories that we tell are meant to be engaging to a general audience. I mean, that's what a general audience wants, is the story of, they want the story. We can't give them the story, but we can give them a story. I think of this, the stories that Lesley wrote are a little bit like good science fiction. We endeavor not to contradict any evidence, but we want to tell a joined up story about what people were doing, and that you have to invent a bunch of parts of that story. And at the same time, the book operates basically on three levels. So there's the stories, and then there's a discussion of the evidence that we think is relevant to that story. All of the things that we think we know about the past, and then finally there's notes that are really meant for our academic colleagues rather than the casual reader of the book. But if people want to know in more detail, we cite authors and discuss. There are a bunch of little mini essays in the notes that discuss the topics in greater depth. So that's the basic structure of the book. We wanted to put the science forward, but we also wanted to tell a story.
This is actually the great timing for the book. I don't know how many of you are aware, but this year we just celebrated 150th anniversary of Darwin's book, The Descent of Man. And basically that was the point of time when scientific investigation into our origins started. And in this 150 years, a lot of different things happened. And it's in biology, it's in social sciences, different social sciences, including anthropology, psychology, political science, even in philosophy. So there is this huge number of different fields that emerged from Darwin's ideas, Darwin's scientific method. And there is a lot of confusion because people in different sciences, they don't talk much. It's always kind of the boundaries between different disciplines are, very deep and difficult to cross. So what the book is accomplishing, it kind of gives the whole picture in a very accessible way, describing these 7 million years or whatever in a way where you can see connections, you can see the progress you can see importance of certain random events, and then of course with ideas of cooperation and of cultural evolution. And that's what made us unique, what made us who we are, and what basically now controls or drives our civilization, and likely will decide or control how we will end up. So that's kind of the great part about this book, this unifying picture at the right moment, bringing everything together.
Yes, thanks, Sergey.
Yeah. Well, I hope so, because I'm right at the moment. I think a lot of people believe it's impossible for humans to cooperate. They feel that people have lost the will to cooperate, whereas in fact, people are cooperating extraordinarily well in a way. I think with this coronavirus pandemic, I mean, even though we're complaining all the time that there isn't enough cooperation, it's quite extraordinary the amount of cooperation there is. Does anybody else feel like that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even today, the headline was about how we're going to send vaccines to India. So for sure, global cooperation. So I wanted to turn the discussion a little, if possible, towards history. So in my experience of the book, that Lesley and Pete make a very concrete assessment, conclusion, hypothesis, that, just like Virginia Woolf said, on or about 1910, the world changed. I feel like Pete and Lesley are saying that on or about 1860s, the world changed in the sense that humans kind of got ahead of their reproductive practices. And I really love the example that they adduced to that, which is that Darwin, himself, I guess the father of the hypothesis of our origins, had 10 children, right? He and his wife had 10 children, but none of his children had more than 2 children themselves. And so I find that kind of fascinating, that the downward fertility, the declining fertility, and what it might say to us about our bigger ideas of history, about what drives history. If anybody wants to pick that up. I mean, specifically, I'm also thinking of Dr. Turchin, whose focus is on big historical changes, often informed by demographics. I don't know if you want to comment on
this is this is a great chapter. And I read it, I've known about this. It's really a big puzzle, right? I mean, we have been perfected by evolution to leave as many surviving offspring as possible, all right? So how come we have suddenly rebelled against this billions of years, literally, of evolution, and started reducing the number of offspring? This is a huge puzzle, all right? I don't think it's completely resolved. And your book, Pete and Lesley, goes a long way to explaining the why it's a puzzle and providing some solution. But I still think that we would need to, to understand it a bit better. So maybe let me turn it around and ask Lesley, actually. So why didn't people? There's always variation, right, in any society. You talk yourselves about certain religious groups that continue to have lots of babies. So how come they didn't take over the world in the last 100 years?
They're doing it. It's just it takes a little more than 100 years. So
humans can't reproduce that fast.
The North American Anabaptists, who are one of the examples we use in our book, are continuing so far to have completed family sizes averaging on the order of 6 or 7 kids. So I did a back of the envelope calculation one time, and according to my calculation, half of North Americans will be Anabaptists in roughly 2 centuries. The Anabaptists started from an exceedingly low initial population, and now there are a few 100,000 of them, but that's still not very many people. And so at exponential growth rates, it'll take them a couple of centuries, according to my calculation. Not that long in the great scheme of things. Of course, there's no guarantee that they'll maintain that level of fertility for 200 years. All sorts of things frequency dependent things to speak technically, will intervene as they become a dominant or an important component of our population. For example, most of the Anabaptist groups stop education at in the 8th grade, basically. And so how can we run a modern advanced technological civilization when a large proportion of the population only reaches the 8th grade in terms of education? So it'd be fun to live for another 200 years just to see what happens. It'll be a big story.
So what do you think, Lesley? Will the Anabaptists take over the United States in 200 years?
I don't think they will, because, as Pete says, that there won't be a United States if people only have an 8th grade education. But I just think it's very, very interesting that up till now it's been possible for modern societies to attract members, like the United States, among people who've lived in the United States for several generations. The fertility rate is very, very low, but the population keeps rising because immigrants come, and the immigrants all come at exactly the age when they're going to have children, or approaching the age when they're going to have children. So we managed to keep the population stable or growing a bit because the lifestyle we offer is so kind of cushy and nice and interesting. But then it's going to be, and of course Europe is the same. But the thing is that as soon as people start to experience this cushy lifestyle, they realize that they're only going to maintain it if they don't have a lot of kids, because kids really ruin the lifestyle. And it started seeming to me that actually having kids isn't a natural thing at all. We don't have any urge to have kids. It all comes from culture. I mean, people need to feel that having 8 children is like winning a gold medal in the Olympics. You decide winning a gold medal in the Olympics is really good idea, and so you work really, really, really hard in order to do it. So there's that drive from culture, but the drive from culture to produce offspring has gone. Nobody gets a gold medal for having 8 kids. So nobody does.
Well, the Anabaptists do. They do it. So they maintain the kind of culture that prevailed in Europe when they around the time of the Reformation, when the Anabaptists formed. They maintain a village scale communities put family life forward, and so they do basically give gold medals for big families.
Well, in the Soviet Union, we used to officially give medals for Mать Героиня, mother hero. I'm not kidding.
And
did it work?
Yeah, I think I don't remember how many kids you were supposed to have, like 8, I guess, or maybe just 6 was enough.
But can we return to what Lesley said, actually, which I think is very interesting, and that can lead us into interesting territory. You said that if this process of expansion of this group continues unabated, there won't be United States after a while, because you cannot essentially run a country on 8-year-old education. So what you're doing, you're bringing in cultural group selection in fact. And I think that's a big topic, because my own studies have shown that rapid demographic expansion, if it persists for 2 or 3 generations, it almost inevitably has in history led to a state collapse or social breakdown of some sort. So I wonder how much of this competition between different societies could play a role, whereas societies that limit their reproduction actually are more successful than societies that don't limit their reproduction.
Yeah, I agree. It just works out. You just have to work out what you mean by successful. Because obviously the society itself, the culture has to be handed on. And so you need to have the next generation to hand the culture on to. And
Lesley,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you maybe talk a little bit, because I feel like there's also a big theme in the book about how it's really the human's malleable brain that allow us to make all these calculations. So I feel like this conversation is wonderful and perfect. Could you maybe just tie it together to the human brain?
Yeah, well, that's because Sergey and Peter are all so into the cultural evolution way of thinking that we all just take it for granted, which is just that humans don't have these instincts. We have this malleable brain, and we want to earn those gold stars as long as they come from the right people. Because Gabby, I wanted to ask you, because you're kind of at the beginning of your reproductive career, and I was wondering if you could tell us. So if this isn't being too nosy, but what are you thinking about reproduction? Do you want to have children? If so, how many?
So I think that I come from a unique situation as an only child, in that I sometimes hear friends, their reasoning for not wanting to have simply one child is they think that the child will be bored. So my idea of I would totally be fine just having one child, whereas I feel like a lot of my friends say, oh my gosh, I could never just have one. Like, you always need another one to entertain it. Versus I actually think having just one child can work really well. So I definitely would say no more than 2. Like, you couldn't pay me to have more than 2. And especially given that I have grown up in such an imperative time for our environmental stability, and with my education being so lucky to be educated on the realities, of our environment, I think that too does play a role just in how I choose to abstain from eating, meat. I would also abstain from having more than 2 children to kind of, the whole idea of like replacing yourself on the earth versus, having more than 2 children. So yeah, I would say between 1 and 2, if that, yeah.
But you definitely think that you definitely think that your life would be more complete, or that if you had a child, it wouldn't be complete if you didn't try to have a child?
I don't have siblings, so I love my family so much, and I love being able to visit my cousins and stuff, that I think it would be very sad if by the time, I was elder, I didn't have any children, and I didn't have any siblings that had children. I think I gotta make my own, continue my own family so that there's lots of us to chat with. That may sound like a little bit of a self-centered reason, but if I'm being honest, I also I won't have nieces and nephews to adopt as my own children.
Yeah. So Sergey, you've got the medal. Show us the medal from the Soviet Union.
Oh yeah, and it says to get one, you had to have 10 kids, and the youngest one should be at least 1 year old.
That's amazing. And yeah, okay. But I don't think it did work that much, did it? Because there was a huge collapse in fertility in the Soviet Union.
Well, I still remember this like New Year's celebrations on TV. There was a special program where we would have some mothers heroes with their kids. So there was.
The baby bust was during the 1990s. after the Soviet Union collapsed.
I was just going to ask kind of a new conversation point along this idea of reproduction and families. Something this is Luba and I were both talking about was this idea of, clearly the book shows change and evolution, but how, really is the family changing, and what have we learned from this history that may indicate how our family structure may change again in the future, or how it has already changed from our Ice Age ancestors? I think the family dynamics is a super fascinating part of A Story of Us, and how even the males coming in and out of the group, and like you were saying, being the fathers being a participating member of the family really has changed. And as roles continue to change, now we see, now obviously modern, it's different, but seeing like a father stay at home while a mother continues to work, maybe, evolutionarily, there are other things just down the road that you guys may have some ideas on.
Yeah, you do that one, Pete, because the family is an institution, right? Marriage is an institution. So, and you're doing a book on the evolution of institutions, so you'd be a good one to talk about that.
Well, it seems to me that the ancient revolution is that formed human families is a byproduct, in part at least, of our enlarged brain, so that women by themselves could no longer raise an infant. Already chimpanzees have a pretty slim demographic profile, that they don't have enough offspring for their populations to grow very rapidly. And so the first revolution was, I think of it as putting guys to work. In most mammals, males are useless to females aside from the genes that they contribute. And in humans, in order to get fancy culture and big brains, the men had to provide women with the wherewithal to grow those slow maturing, big-brained, useless, helpless kids. And so that was the first revolution. And so human families, my picture of it is that for a long time, human families drifted along without a whole lot of change, from perhaps as early as Australopithecine times until this modern demographic transition, when all of a sudden families became much skimpier and less important to our survival. Once industrial economies produced a large surplus, then even single mothers now can go to the supermarket if they've got money to spend, and raise kids without any help from men at all. There are a few other societies. Siobhan Madison and her colleagues have written a really interesting paper about not a huge number of societies, but a number of societies in which men are practically useless. Women don't need them to make a living in certain kinds of ecological circumstances, and so men become much like mammal males in general, and pretty much useless. So the human family evolved quite rapidly, as we've discussed, in the context of the modernization process, and we tell a story about that. Basically, when members of families became mobile and factory employment became important, then we acquired not just families, but bosses and colleagues at work, and the influence of other family members was in our social networks was substantially diluted. And that's and your friends don't much care whether you have kids or not. In fact, if you have kids, then you can't go to the bar on Friday night, and and you're less good company because you've got to run home and pick up the kids from school and so on. So it's your family members who, your parents and your grandparents and your cousins that take an interest in your reproduction. And when those influences are diluted, the norms that kept families ticking over were correspondingly weakened, and all of the hero medals in the just don't make that big a difference. The French became extremely concerned. They were the country with the earliest demographic transition, started in the 18th century, and they became very concerned because of the military implications. Sergei talked about, or rather, Peter talked about competition between groups, and the French went from the most populous country in Western Europe to the third or fourth most populous as the populations of Britain and Germany, especially increased relative to the French population. And this was thought to be a terrible problem because of the military implications. And the French went out of their way to promote a big family to no effect, basically.
No, that's not true. Actually, there are two countries where the demographic situation is quite favorable, and they are France and Sweden in Western Europe. So French have nearly 2 average babies per woman, and they've gone to huge extremes. So they make it easier for a woman to work, to have great care, child care, and just the whole culture of the country actually is very supportive of motherhood, and that helps. Compare them to Italians or Germans.
In French, we actually pay money to parents. Like I have a collaborator. I guess he's getting like 1,200. I don't remember for the second or for the third child, 1,200 a month euros. Was kind of extra money, just from the government.
And Biden has proposed the same thing or a similar scheme for the United States, but still that just at best barely gets the birth rate up to replacement, right? It's not like it pushes it up to Anabaptist rates or anywhere near that. So it makes a difference, a couple 3/10, 4/10 of a child per woman on average.
No, it's difference between 2 and 1.3, 1.4 in Germany, Italy. That's a big difference.
Yeah, it is. But it's still not undoing the demographic transition.
If I can, I just want to draw your attention to another very important topic of this book. Families are extremely important, but this book is also about social learning and about cultural evolution. So basically, what made us who we are was social learning, as our ability to learn and to teach from ours. And basically, that's what created foundations for our culture, for our cumulative culture. And with that, what also came into the play, some new factors and processes. We are now mostly driven by social norms, by our beliefs, by our values, and all these things are coming from social learning. We are able to internalize different things. We are able to internalize different ideas, and that helps us greatly. And we're greatly, but we're also greatly affected by external influences. We are greatly affected by not only by teaching, but also by propaganda, by misinformation. And there are many different attempts in social sciences to modify human social behavior by properly chosen messages that can make you to recycle or to do vaccination or maybe to have more children. So that may offer kind of a path, not just by money, but also by appropriate messaging, appropriate propaganda, and whatever word you prefer to use in this context. And everything kind of goes back to this ability to learn socially that we evolved.
But Sergey, if there's propaganda now, to be good and to recycle, I mean, think of how many years we've been exposed to the propaganda that tells us to buy big cars or to change the clothes that we wear every year and to be wasteful. And we have really no concept of how that's affected us. It's kind of horrific, actually.
Well, no, people in business who sell us stuff, they know it works pretty well, right? Politicians know it works pretty well. Religious leaders know it works pretty well. So some people are well aware of this.
The advertising industry over decades has invested millions and hundreds of millions of dollars into learning how to influence people to buy things. So it's applied cultural evolution, actually.
Or think about the last election. What was the amount of money spent on commercial and advertising? It's all about this. And it's again, as I said, it goes back to how we came to be. It's kind of in our genes to be able to learn from ours, and that means to be susceptible to all these external influences.
Right,
And that's very much.
And the philosophical and discussion of this goes back to the Greeks, right? Rhetoric was the term they used, and rhetoric has this moral ambiguity about it. Sometimes rhetoric is used to bring people together to accomplish great common goals. On the other hand, unscrupulous politicians and business people, or maybe not even unscrupulous, but there's a self-interested element to this way that can sometimes overwhelm the pro-social part of persuasion. So the moral dimension of this has been under discussion at least since the Greeks.
Yeah, and there is kind of related to component of it. Peter Richerson mentioned group selection. And group selection, it's powerful also because, of the topic of social identity. The easiest way to motivate people to do something is to somehow trigger their social identity and the norms associated with that. And this goes back to our life when to our evolutionary history, when we were living in small groups, trying to cooperate and do something together, solving challenges that nature put forward, or trying to overcome neighboring groups. So again, it's kind of this evolutionary history. It remains extremely important in our everyday life.
Yeah, and I would argue that for years and years, or for almost all of human evolutionary history, our main social identity was the family. I mean, we all have our family name as part of our name. It defined who our ancestors were to a much greater extent than today, when we define ourselves in many other ways.
So my studies focus on anthropology. So I have a podcast entitled That Anthro Podcast. It's available on all the major streaming services, so Spotify, iTunes, Anchor. And I started it really because as a student during COVID times, I was missing engaging and having conversations just like this, where we can bounce off of each other, have conversations about everyone's opinions. So, I felt like a podcast would be a really great way to continue having fun conversations, particularly in anthropology during this really disconnecting time. And, books are so wonderful and wonderful, ways that I've been recommending for my listeners to be engaged. So, talking to Lesley and Peter and learning more about A Story of Us just worked out so wonderfully, and so happy to have had them on the podcast.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we recommend everyone to check out Gabrielle Campbell's podcast. There were some comments as well. Rosemary Hopcroft said that the social and ecological environment has changed a great deal since the Industrial Revolution. That must have been a comment to some previous remark. And Matthew Solomon, who is our regular viewer, thank you, Matthew, for attending. Always excellent questions, is saying it is meaningful to think of a particular stage of evolution when Homo sapiens began to reflect on their own mortality, when perhaps the idea of a future that survives them gains currency.
I guess one of the things that humans maybe stopped doing a long time ago was reflecting alone. And so I think that we rely on others, on what we socially learn, to form our beliefs, and then being around other people who believe like us, our beliefs get strengthened. And I think one of the things that's kind of frightening about our individualism at the moment is that so many people are on their own and not having conversations about their beliefs, and not helping each other to keep their beliefs strong. And I think that a belief about a purpose in life is so important to have, whether it involves a religious purpose or whether it involves being rewarded when you die or not. I think that purpose is so important, and I think that at some point in our evolution, sharing the purpose of the people we lived with became very, very important. And I think that that's something that we miss out on today tremendously. Does that make sense for other people?
Polly Wiesner has a lovely paper in which she discusses what people talk about during the day. This is in the Kalahari-san, what they talk about during the day and what they talk about around the campfire at night. And during the day, they gossip and complain and plan and do a whole lot of just practical things, using language to organize their lives. At night, they tell stories, and it seems to me that reflecting on our lives is generally mediated by storytelling. We tell stories about our past. We tell stories about the heroes in our culture. We tell stories about mythical creatures. We tell stories about animals with human qualities, and in part this is just entertaining. But it also, according to Polly, it breeds solidarity. During the day, life in a hunter-gatherer camp is fairly fractious. There's a lot of animosities and quarrels and things that go on. But this at night, people put all that away, and the stories that they tell are solidarity building. So that what gets fractious during the day gets repaired around the campfire at night. That's her analysis of years and years of recording conversations during the day and at night. And so then we start to tell stories about what the afterlife might be like, or what we have all sorts of, we tell all sorts of counterfactual stories, or fictional stories if you want, and enjoy it a lot.
Great answers, thank you. And I think that leads us to another point. And unfortunately, I didn't have time to finish the book or to read the whole book, which I will, because we have sometimes 2 shows a week, and that's a lot of reading. I just don't have time to finish everything. But the question is, do you have in your book a chapter perhaps, or a part that goes into this whole notion of abstract thinking? Because we're talking about narrative, weaponizing narratives, the function of the narratives in the human society and thinking. So what about the more cardinal idea of humans starting to utilize or to develop abstract thinking? What is the point of it? Is there a purpose? Is there a story on that?
So my thinking is not very deep or knowledgeable about it, but let me throw this out. So our huge brains, which are really amazing computers, I think that it makes more sense that they have evolved as an engine of social computation, to live in a group of dozens of people, and also to have relationships, meaningful relationships with maybe another 100 or so at other camps. You need to know who did what to whom, and not only that, what the third parties, how they reacted, whether they approved or disapproved, and so on and so forth. And once you get to a group of 100 more people, there is just a huge amount of information you have to keep in your brain. So this is known as the social mind hypothesis, which makes a lot of sense to me. And so our ability to do science is an epiphenomenon. It's a side effect, if you wish, of this social computation, which was put to new users. That makes a lot of sense to me.
So I have always complained about the social brain hypothesis, because it seems to me that the trouble is it's contrasted with the ecological brain hypothesis or the technological brain hypothesis. It's not so much for keeping track of social life, but of technology and subsistence techniques and that sort of thing. But the problem is that human subsistence technology is also very social. So we have to learn from other people how to make our bows and arrows and all of the other artifacts that we make. So one of the most interesting books that I read a long time ago now is by a South African named Louis Liebenberg, who worked with San people again in their tracking practices. So they're masters at tracking animals, and they do this by, he thinks this is sort of the genesis of science. And it's both social and technological, you might say. So an animal they're trying to decide whether to track a particular animal or not. So they don't want to track typically a prime animal that can easily run away. They're looking for signs that the animal whose tracks they see is a little sick or wounded or old, and therefore might be more vulnerable to attack. And so they have these very ambiguous clues as to what this animal is like, and they discuss it. There are 3 or 4 guys tracking together, and every clue is interpreted in terms of hypotheses about what this animal might be like, where it's going, and so on. And they debate as they're tracking along. They debate the various hypotheses, and so this is. It's, on the one hand, it's extremely social, and on the other hand, it's really driven by a lot of technical knowledge about natural history and the weapons that they have, what can they kill and what can't they kill, and under what circumstances. So it seems to me that the technological brain and the social brain are all mashed together, and you can't separate the two. That's my complaint about the social brain hypothesis.
About the origin of abstract thinking, I think the oldest like ornaments and use of different colors is at least 100,000 years old. So presumably that's, and of course language, I think when language emerged, that kind of implied you using something. And again, it's unclear when language appeared in our species I think I saw data about 80 and 70,000 years ago. But using ornaments is older than that.
Unfortunately, language doesn't. It's another one of these things that doesn't turn up straightforwardly in the archaeological, paleoanthropological record until until writing. And so there was an old idea that even the Greeks had primitive language. The classical Greeks. What was a guy, Julian James? It seemed like a silly hypothesis to me, but it was hard to refute.
Well, which leads us to something, and I'm gonna just abuse my hostess privilege and ask another question that I've always been bothered by, and it's because I'm a writer, and in the past I studied languages, linguistics. So Sapir-Whorf theory: does language define thoughts? Do the words determine our ideas? What does the theory of evolution or anthropology or you guys have to say about that?
Yeah, I think that the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis has gained a lot of strength in recent years. So Susan Carey, a developmental psychologist at Harvard, has an interesting book on the origin of concepts. And one of the things that she notes is that without culturally transmitted concepts, we can't think about certain things. So one of her examples is mathematics, counting. So lots of cultures have no culturally transmitted mathematical knowledge at all. So their number system is one, too many. Other cultures have at least integer counting, and so people can count to you can count to infinity, right? If you have infinite time to do it. So concepts that we learn affect our thinking profoundly, it seems to me. Scientists learn models and methods, and our whole way of looking at the world is transformed by the mental machinery that we're taught and bring with us. The world looks a lot different if you have one concept as opposed to another, and it starts with things that are as simple as counting and alphabets and other mental tools.
So abstract thinking could just be a mental tool. I mean, the idea that some thinking is abstract and other thinking is concrete is something that is just a mental tool.
Wow, that's all, I think it always opens the whole new world of discussions. And of course, we can have a show after show.
What is the takeaway from your book?
That's a really good question, Maury. So the takeaway is that humans are very flexible, that the future matters, and that the future is children, and that there is a hope, but maybe the basics that we've been thinking about, we think about now, don't include some of the things that are really important.
Say that again, please. I didn't understand.
Well, so we talk about economies, and we talk about environments, and we talk about things, and
we covered it
that are very much of the day. And if we want a future, we need to project. We need to open our minds and see how things are going. And so, I mean, I think a lot of people might think it kind of crazy that we've talked so much about having children and caring for children. But in evolutionary terms, that's what matters. It's making copies. It's making copies of genes. It's spreading ideas and information. That's how we became what we are. And if we as a species want to continue, we need to keep on passing on information and passing on our genes to the next generation. And that should be a priority. That's my takeaway message. Anybody else?
Well, to me, it's similar, well, close to what you said. Basically, to understand the present and to try to make the future better, we need to know history. And in this case, it's evolutionary history.
Right. So yeah, that's the way I think of it. And the way I would put it provocatively is that modernity is not sustainable. The kind of lives that we lead are not demographically sustainable, and they're not. I mean, everyone talks about the environmental unsustainability of modernity. So things need to be accomplished. We need to change in ways that make our lives more sustainable. If we're going to, otherwise there'll be a lot of pain in the world that we could avoid. And we do have this rough and limited way of cooperating to solve collective action problems. And we need to. We have these kind of global scale problems, and at best, historically, our societies have operated at sort of a national scale fairly effectively, but at the global scale, it's still pretty shaky. What we need to accomplish compared to what social tools we have to accomplish those things. So we have the IPCC and the international climate meetings to deal with the global warming problem, and we've made a lot of progress, but we're not there yet. And so I think that, as Sergey says, understanding the history, where we've come from, and what we need to accomplish to get around the next corner is one of the big homes.
But we should also take heart from the fact that we are an amazing species and we've accomplished so much because we have this cultural evolution thing going for us.
So on one level, then, I mean, as I hear it all, we're still fighting for our turf, whether we're on the savannah or in the woods. We're so tribal. We do it with fancier stuff, but we really haven't changed.
I don't know if we need to be tribal. I don't know. I mean, we've never not been tribal. It could be possible not to be tribal.
Well, if you talk about a certain kind of cooperation or a collective, we're going to have to really get past a lot of stuff.
Well, I would argue with you because actually we are capable of cooperation at really huge scales. So my great example is the International Space Station, which has, it is the most expensive, most laborious object ever constructed by humanity. It was done primarily by US and Russians and a bunch of other countries. So that's pretty good. And then United Nations, we like to knock United Nations, but it has done a huge job of preventing wars, resolving wars quickly, or dealing with the consequences. So it's the glass is half empty, half full.
Can I take issue with that? The space station is by people who love what they're doing. What the motives that may have put all the money and effort into creating it and doing it on a global basis is still going to be highly local, very political, and self-serving to one country in one way or another. I love the idea of the space station, and I got involved with a lot of the people who were doing parts of it. They are into it. This is their love, as you guys.
Well, I also helped. I paid taxes. 1 billion people paid taxes to sustain the space station.
The other thing with the UN, it's a self-serving bureaucracy. I mean, I'm glad it's there, and it was nice to look at, and I was very excited about it in the beginning, and I watched all of this. I don't know what's going on. And respectfully, it's a lot of people really well dressed doing a lot of talking.
So one of my favorite examples are the successful polyglot cities of the world. Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, London, Amsterdam, cities with a huge mixture of tribes, if you want, and mostly they get along fairly well and they work. So all we have to do is make the whole world like London or New York, and then it's done and dusted.
You know, parking is bad enough. To make it like those two cities, we got to do something better.
Well, they've got wonderful public transport systems too, right? The trains run on time, more or less.
I just one final comment. On behalf of single kids, it's a good deal. If you can find somebody every so often to deflect your parents, it's really good being an only child.
Yeah, agreed. I'm like from the club of single children, especially if you have wonderful cousins. That's the best of the world.
Yeah, cousins make the big difference. Yeah.
I was an only child for 9 years and my sister was born and my whole life fell apart.
Well, one day we'll do a show on siblings rivalry, but for now we're all for collaboration and existing peacefully. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming
and for that
organizing it and everything.
I will be bringing that back to Luba. Speaking of cousins, Luba, are you there? Do you want to kind of do the final roundup?
Sounds good. I'll be happy to. Well, thank you everyone for participating in this discussion. It was interesting, exciting. I love the different perspectives, the different points of view, all of the interesting facts and data that was cited. So I really hope that, you know, as a result, people have a better idea of what this book can promise them. And, you know, with this interview posted on YouTube, we hope that it could also be used to, you know, promote the book, just to bring it out into the world a little more. So thank you so much. Thank you to Drs. Richerson, Gavrilis, Lesley, Pete, Gabby, who left. Thank you to all of you for coming and joining us. Thank you to Zarina for organizing it.
Many thanks to Luba to put it together in the first place. And also great thanks to our audience today on YouTube and on Zoom. And please subscribe to our channel because your likes and subscription helps us to bring you the book shows, of which we have many, and we have many more planned. So please hit the subscribe button. It helps us. Thank you so much. Congratulations on your book. You can purchase it at Globus Books, www.globusbooks.com, or stop by if you are in San Francisco. We have a lovely bakery next door. And have a wonderful, wonderful day, and stay safe, write more books, and we'll be back with you soon.